Who are you?
Oh, you better be joking.
You got no guts.
How embarrassing. There they are. They were inside you the whole time. You did have guts. I've never been so wrong in my whole life.
So I have to admit to you guys, this intro I put in this video was inspired by a Push Square article that I came across yesterday, and it's titled Sony, the world isn't ready for game streaming, consoles like PS5 are still necessary, the PlayStation maker takes a stab at Stadia. So obviously you can tell where the inspiration came from there, and I want to make it clear that it's not the article writer who's saying this. This is actually Sony saying this. Sony is the one coming out here saying that they don't believe the world is ready to embrace game streaming yet, and that consoles like the PlayStation 5 are still completely necessary. And you guys know we've been talking at length on my channel about the idea of this cloud gaming future and how I'm against it. And there have been a decent amount of people that have come at me saying that I'm just entitled and I just like to cry and whine and that I don't have anything actually backing it up. But the good news is today we actually have a survey, actual data that I can provide here that backs up a lot of what I've been saying and a lot of what we have been saying collectively, saying that people just don't want streaming as the future when it comes to gaming. And if it is going to actually be the future, it is a long ways off. And I'm not talking 5 years from now. I'm not even talking like 10 years from now. I'm talking maybe the way distant future, like 20, 25 years from now. Although I would argue that things do change rapidly, so maybe that's a little bit of a stretch. But the point is, here in 2019, mid-2019, going into 2020, there's a survey that's come out here that really shows, hey, people don't want this. They just don't want it, and this is why I think Google Stadia is going to fail. It's going to fail hard, and why I think Microsoft is being a little bit smarter now by really trying to position xCloud at this point in time. If you notice the way they talk about it, is like it's a supplement. It's supplementary to their console and PC endeavors, which is a very smart thing for them to do, in my opinion. But starting here, going over this information of what Sony had to say when it comes to streaming, says that Sony isn't about to go all in on game streaming. With the PlayStation 5 on the horizon, the company has basically come out and said that it doesn't think the world is ready to fully commit to services like Google Stadia just yet. It chalks this up to the fact that not everyone has good, stable internet connection, and as such, consoles are still a necessity, especially when it comes to playing the most demanding games. A revealing report from the Wall Street Journal outlines Sony's current stance on streaming. Company CEO Kenichiro Yoshida says that the PS5's dramatically increased graphical processing power clearly demonstrates why it makes sense to have a next-generation console. Sony sees the likes of Google Stadia as a potential competitor in the gaming sphere, but says that streaming services like are a mid to long-term threat to PlayStation, not an immediate one. Obviously, Sony has already invested in streaming technology with PlayStation Now, but it's clearly not a major priority for the company at this point in time. Now, I feel like it's really important to highlight Sony saying this because it's a clear stance, and their stance is completely different and the complete opposite of what Google is with Stadia, and I'd say it's not the complete opposite of Microsoft's stance, but it's certainly further away from Microsoft's stance, where Google is out here saying the future streaming, we're all in on streaming. Okay, they don't even care about hardware. They want a console-less future. And clearly, you can see how people have been responding to that so far. And then you have Microsoft, where this is why I also think Sony still considers Xbox their main competition, because while Xbox is nowhere near on the level that PlayStation is right now, that doesn't mean that couldn't change going into the future over the next 5 years. And Microsoft has made it clear that they still support the console and they're still taking it seriously with Project Scarlet, which is good. And they are out here buying studios, and even though they are going down the route of services and subscriptions, that doesn't mean that their plans can't change once they see that it's just not maybe working out the way for them they were hoping it would. We're going to have to wait to see about that, though. But I'm just trying to highlight, I think this is why some people yesterday were almost laughing at the fact that PlayStation has come out here, or Sony has come out here and went on record saying that they still view Xbox as their main competition. A lot of people just kind of write that off, like, you know, and it's totally understandable at this point in time why people have that view. Like, why would Sony have that view? But this is where I honestly think Sony's being very smart. They're not getting complacent. They're still respecting their competition, even though their competition seems like they're kind of out there doing their own thing, but they still don't want to completely ignore them. Very smart of them to do that. But Microsoft's stance seems to be like xCloud is pretty much just a complementary thing to console gaming, and maybe one day it can take over as the future. We're still going to support it. We're still going to invest in this. We have the infrastructure to do so. Makes sense, you know. So it's one of these things where I think at first maybe Microsoft had this idea that it was going to be the biggest thing in the world. Maybe all, you know, both Microsoft and Sony looked at this recent survey that we're about to talk about and kind of backed off on it a little bit. But, you know, there's a clear difference between Google, Microsoft, and Sony. And Sony's out here pretty much saying the opposite of both of these guys, saying, like, look, you know, they have went on record saying they're going to invest more heavily into PlayStation now going into next generation. That shouldn't surprise anybody. Sony does still have, you know, their, you know, they have a horse in this race. It's just not, you know, as intense or as serious as both Google and Microsoft. And so they are going to continue to invest in PlayStation now, but they're also coming out here saying that it's not something they think people are really ready to embrace, and they're still fully supporting the console. They're doubling down on their console efforts. We talked yesterday about how they're doubling down on the idea of bringing more AAA games to support the console, and they understand that this formula is established and it works, and it's a formula that Google wants nothing to do with, clearly, and it's a formula that Microsoft has been straying away from pretty much this entire generation, and it really just makes you question why. Like, one of the biggest things I see people say in my comment sections that I completely agree with is, like, how can people like Phil Spencer and even like Phil Harrison over at Google, how can they look at the success that PlayStation is finding in the gaming space, and they're the market leader by a far margin, you know, by a good lead, and they just think, we don't need to do that. We're going to do our own thing. We're going to carve out our own path. I mean, it's noble. Like, sure, you can try to carve out a new path, but that's probably not going to work out for you guys the way you're thinking. Anyway, I'm getting a little bit off track here. I want to bring up this study that was conducted. A lot of you guys had mentioned it to me. You guys were saying I was surprised I didn't talk about it. I was just waiting for the right moment. It says here that just 15% of European gamers are interested in Google Stadia and xCloud. 70% of gamers surveyed in the UK, France, Germany, and Spain say that they are not interested in video game streaming services. It says that 15% of the surveyed gamers, defined as anyone playing games via any device, are interested in a Netflix-style streaming service for games in the 4 territories included in the study. The remainder either don't now at 12% or already utilize a service akin to Google Stadia and Microsoft xCloud, just as the current market leader, PlayStation Now. The irony there. The irony that PlayStation Now is considered the market leader, right? And Sony's the one out here saying that they don't believe it's the future. It's so weird. Says just 3%. Now get this. Just 3% of gamers claim to be, quote, very interested in such a streaming service. The country that is most intrigued in the gaming streaming platforms is the UK, with 23% of players claiming to be very interested, although just 5% are very interested, followed by France and Spain at 14%. German players are the least interested, with just 10% of gamers keeping an eye on the services and 75% who are not interested. Interestingly, European gamers are not too concerned by the challenges of internet connection. GameTrack asked gamers across the 4 markets to agree or disagree with the series of statements, and 43% believe that their internet connection is fast enough to stream games. 23% disagreed, with the remainder unsure. The UK is the market that is most bullish about its internet capabilities, with 54% agreeing that their internet connection is strong enough to stream games. The least confident market is France, where 37% agreed with the statement. However, 32% of gamers across the territory said that they would worry about my internet connection dropping, which would prevent me from streaming games, whereas 28% were not concerned by this. Interestingly, the UK the market most confident that games can be streamed is also the territory most concerned about internet dropping at 45%. So, I mean, this article goes on. I think I read more than I even planned to, but the point here is this, people. There's real data now, okay? There's real actual data out here supporting claims from people like me and many others that streaming is not ready, and it doesn't seem like it's going to be ready anytime soon. I've heard people argue that, xCloud and Stadia, the technology is already there. It's 90 or 95% of the way there. So if that's true, then it paints an even worse picture, in my opinion, for people saying that, it's the future. Because if the technology's already there, I've heard people who got to try xCloud at E3 this year, if the technology's there and it's still just something people don't want to use, then I think that these companies like Microsoft and Google are honestly in for a very rude awakening, where I just don't think the market, at least the market as it is today and as it will be for the next 5 to 10 years, doesn't care. I do see people utilizing it, but I see it as a very, very secondary thing. I do not see it ever getting even close to the point of it being the primary way that people are going to play anytime soon. I think that much is obvious. And all you have to do is just look at surveys like this, and it paints a clear picture. 70% of people are not interested. Just right off the bat, they just don't care. And even then, when you have to have questions raised like, what about internet connections? Are you worried about that? Are you worried about having a strong enough connection? And it creates this layer of complexity that, listen, I understand the whole idea of game streaming will appeal to people because they don't have to pay a lot of money, an absurd amount of money, that, as some people may consider it, to get access to the biggest and best games. But I would argue that that's not really how people are. I mean, maybe some people are like that, and I understand that people do greatly care about convenience, and in some cases they care about convenience more than anything else. But I'm telling you, the second they try out a streaming service and they have a bad experience, they're done. They're just done. They're not going to continue to support it, no matter how cheap it is. They're going to realize that, maybe there's a reason why this only costs $10 to access, and it's, costs X amount of dollars to buy a piece of hardware and play it natively. It's because the difference in quality and what you're going to receive, in some cases, is huge. It's absolutely huge, especially when you think about playing competitive multiplayer games. We know how popular multiplayer games are. I just don't see that happening. I just don't. Maybe for some people, a certain market, but for the majority of people, they just want the traditional PC console experience, native hardware, and they want to have their Ethernet cables most of the time, if it's ideal, plugged into their console so they can have the best connection possible. So when they're playing their online games, there's still always going to be lag. That's the thing. There still always is lag and connection problems, even with native hardware, even when you do have your Ethernet cable plugged directly into your machine. So just imagine how much worse it's going to be when you're trying to stream these games, right? Especially at 4K 60 or whatever. It's crazy. It blows my mind that Google's walking into this industry thinking they're just going to take over. No, you're not. Nobody cares. And I don't know how many times I have to express this, but here you go, Google. Here you go, Microsoft. Here's the data for you. You want to see how many people, how many Europeans are excited for your product? Not many. I'd be interested to see a survey conducted with the U.S. to see if it's any different. Something tells me it's not going to be much different, honestly. I don't see it being much different. But yeah, that's going to do it for the video, guys. It's turning out to be longer than I wanted it to. I just wanted to take some time to talk about, Sony's current stance on game streaming. Some of us were maybe getting a little bit worried that they're going to invest too heavily in it. They're definitely not doing that, especially not, in going into next generation, it's something they're still going to be paying attention to. They're going to be covering all their bases, like I said, and they still see it as something that they need to pay attention to and they need to be involved in. The irony that they're currently the market leader is not lost on me, but, you have Microsoft and Google out here. They're just clearly trying to do their own thing, especially Google, and, as the intro of this video tried to convey, I think it's really, really a bad idea for either of these companies, especially Google, to underestimate Sony and the power of the console and the brand that's already been established and how people play their games. That's not going to be something they're going to uproot anytime soon. regardless of how much money they throw at it. I don't think that this is a money problem. So, yeah, we're going to have to wait to see how it all pans out, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Leave the video a like if you enjoyed it or agree with me. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Hit the bell notification icon, and feel free to share the video out on top of all that. But until next time, guys, take care.